Hey guys, Hamsterwheel here with a new video, and today I'm going to give you a review of the main server that I'm playing on, which is Primal Wow. Now, before I start with my review, I'd like to let you know that I started playing on this server 9 months ago. I got 3 level 60s, and I've done a lot of raiding here and cleared raids such as Molten Core, Blackwing Lair, Zul'Gurub, and so on. So this review is coming from someone that has put a lot of time in here, so yeah, my review of the server isn't just based on a quick leveling experience or someone who got to level 60 but only touched a few dungeons and such. Alright, now that we got that out of the way, it's time for my review. So let's start at the beginning, shall we? Primal Wow is a 1x leveling progressive server that runs on a 3.3 point client, and what that means is that the core of the game is still Wrath of the Lich King, but it will slowly progress from vanilla content to Wrath content. As of right now, only vanilla content is available, with the current highest raid being Blackwing Lair. Now for me, this is one of the strong points of Primal Wow, because let's face it, there are many specs in WoW Vanilla that don't really work in a raiding environment. Think about Elemental Shamans, Balanced Druids, Retribution Paladins, and the list goes on and on. However, here on Primal, most of those specs actually work, so you basically get to experience vanilla content but roll with whatever class and spec you want. I had tons of fun rolling around as a Smite Priest, and yes, it actually kind of works here, where in vanilla I would have been forced to go Holy. So yeah, being able to do vanilla content with a completely different spec and such definitely brings something new to the table that we haven't really seen before on private servers, and this is what kind of drew me towards this server in the first place. Alright, let's talk about leveling, shall we? Now, because this is running on a Wrath of the Lich King client, leveling is pretty smooth, but there are still some cases where you really have to pay attention, unlike later expansions where it just becomes one big phase roll. I really like how you can also cast a fair amount of spells before going out of mana, unlike vanilla for instance where you cast 4 spells when you're low level and then you have to wait 15 seconds to replenish your mana. So in my opinion, the balance here between convenience and challenge is pretty darn good. You still have to make some decisions on how to kill a certain pack of mobs in some cases, and leveling is still challenging enough for gear to actually matter here. So even in lower level dungeons, you still get that sense of pride when you get your hands on the Illusionary Rod in SM Library or the sword from Van Cleave in the Depth Mines. Speaking of dungeons, the RDF2 is implemented here, but there's certainly no doing nothing but waiting in Orgrimmar and just spamming dungeons over and over. Because of the rather low population, I'll talk about that later, you do have to wait a decent amount of time before you can do a random dungeon, especially if you only queue as a DPS. This means that almost everyone is still out there in the world, killing mobs and completing quests while leveling, which definitely helps in making the world feel more alive and social. Another thing I have to add is how enjoyable it was to see other people while leveling. Not only because it helps in terms of the MMO aspect, but also because almost every time I saw someone, we exchanged buffs, we helped each other kill a mob or two, and there's actually been several times where I teamed up with someone else to complete quests that we both needed. I really love this about Primal Wow. I've leveled on several other servers, and there were only 1 or 2 where the leveling experience in terms of the social aspect was really good. So what about the quests? Well, while leveling, I think I barely had to deal with any bugged quests. Even more complicated quests where you have to escort someone, or a quest where there's a certain script that needs to pop up, work just fine. I really expected the quest to pretty much work flawlessly though, since this is a 1x leveling raid server, and needless to say, I was not disappointed. I also got to talk about dungeons a bit while I'm still covering the leveling aspect. The lower level dungeons all seem to work fine apart from the minor hiccup or two. Both Wailing Caverns and the Depth Mines for instance showed the right animation and scripts, so once again hats off to Primal for having almost every single leveling dungeon work flawlessly. Now, this being Wrath of the Lich King, the dungeons themselves have become easier compared to the Burning Crusade or Vanilla. In this expansion, it's all about the AoE, and CC is barely needed, which is a bit of a shame because I would have liked to see a bit more challenge in the dungeons. However, this doesn't mean that these dungeons are a complete cakewalk. You still have to pay attention for curses, poisons, and aggro, and that does mean that I still enjoyed these dungeons very much, because it's not just rolling your face over the keyboard and getting free loot, something which was most definitely the case while leveling on WoW Freaks, which uses the Mist of Pandaria version of the game. Another thing I'd like to add, and which you probably might have seen already, is that Primal has cross-faction enabled, so you will be teamed up with members of the opposite faction, which might get some people annoyed. Me on the other hand, I have no problem with this. It means that you can have both a pally and a shaman in your team, which means more buffs in raid, and who doesn't want more buffs? So that kind of covers the dungeons. What about the raids? Well, as I said, I've done every single raid that Primal has to offer as of right now, and they aren't perfect. I'll start off by saying that I am actually very happy to be back in 40-man raids. I did kind of criticize them here and there in some of my videos because it is a logistical nightmare, but man, does it look just epic. 40 people all working together, doing their own individual tasks in order to achieve the same goal: killing the bosses and getting epics. The experience is quite something, and it's still a wonderful sight to see that many people in one single raid. Now, this being a Wrath of the Lich King client, you might be wondering, aren't the vanilla dungeons and raids very easy because of that? Well, not really, because Primal WoW did try to compensate for the fact that classes are much stronger at level 60 than they are in WoW Vanilla. For one, they added a healing nerf, which basically means that healers do less healing and their heals cost more mana. Another thing they did was add more health to the bosses and up the damage of their abilities. In a lot of fights, these tweaks work fine, and they really do offer a fair bit of challenge. It took a lot of effort for guilds here on Primal to kill Ragnaros or Onyxia for the first time, for instance. So these raids were definitely no face roll when they first came out. However, because of these tweaks, some bosses aren't exactly harder, they just take a bit more time to kill. So in a way, some bosses are just complete bullet sponges and more tedious than it is challenging and fun. So yeah, the tweaks certainly offer more challenge, but sometimes they don't always work out that well. Now, another thing that Primal is doing different with the raids here is that they will nerf the content every month or so. So basically when a new raid is released, it's buffed up the ass, and over time they are nerfing it to a point where it becomes much more doable. This is both a good thing and a not so good thing, in my opinion. Basically, this means that the hardcore raiding guilds have to put in a lot of effort to clear content that has just been released, which is fun, but it also means that this content will eventually become a bit of a face roll. Zul'Gurub used to be very challenging, and nowadays me and my raiding guild step into that instance with ults and just own the whole place, killing bosses and going, wait, he's already dead? Now, this does mean that guilds that are more casual will eventually be able to experience and do the same content that the hardcore raiding guild is doing, but it does mean that that content will become more tedious and boring to those who are looking for a good challenge. So yeah, the nerfing of the content for me is a bit of a mixed bag. Another thing that I have to criticize is that some boss encounters aren't working correctly. For instance, Razorgore isn't spawning any ads as of this moment, and this bug has been reported months ago and still hasn't been fixed. I don't know if this hasn't been fixed yet because it requires an extreme amount of effort, or that the Primal team hasn't been able to tackle this problem, but it does make the raids a little wonky here and there. Luckily, the majority of bosses here work just fine, so bugs like that are definitely the exception. Right, so that covers the actual content. What about the classes? I mean, this is level 60 stuff, but with a Wrath of Lich King core. Doesn't that cause some balance issues when it comes to classes? Well, yeah, and that is unfortunate. I've been raiding as a mage for months now, and us mages never top the DPS meters unless it's an AoE fight. We usually hover at around 800 to 900 DPS on a good day, while the warrior with the same amount of gear does more than 1k DPS with ease. So this is something you definitely have to keep in mind. There are balance issues, and classes like the mage will have to settle for suboptimal DPS, so be sure to keep that in mind if you're someone that has this urge to constantly be number one in DPS meters. There's definitely some difference in terms of how much DPS every class can do, and it's not balanced that well because of the fact that it's level 60 but it's running on a Wrath Lich King client. Before I move on to professions, I'd like to talk about the population very briefly. When I started playing, this hovered at around 50 to 100 people, which is definitely not a whole lot, and places like Orgrimmar and such felt really empty. However, it has been getting better lately. We are now starting to break 400 people online during weekends, so in terms of population, it's growing. But admittedly, Primal still has a long way to go before it is a properly populated server. Okay, now I'll cover professions briefly. They are set to 1x leveling rate, just like the XP rate here on the server, and both primary and secondary professions seem to work fine. I haven't yet been able to check out fishing and cooking that much, because I'm a casual scrub. But most primary professions that I work with, meaning tailoring, leatherworking, skinning, and mining, are working perfectly. Later in the game there might be some issues, cause some enchants that drop in AQ40 require you to have Burning Crusade materials in order to get them. Yeah, that's kind of the thing you needed for those enchants on a Wrath Lich King server. And I'm not sure how Primal will solve this, but we'll just have to wait and see. But as far as I know, professions seem to work just fine. So for PvP I can't really talk about it that much since I barely ever do it. From my brief experience and what I heard from other people, it's not exactly perfect. The battlegrounds themselves work just fine, but the balance issues between classes definitely cause some problems here, and certain setups in Arena are very powerful, while some barely work. Another problem is that as of right now there isn't a whole lot of PvPing going on. Low level PvP in battlegrounds barely ever happens, and at level 60 there's still a lot of waiting time for them, and when you do get into one it's usually a total of 6 to 8 people. However, there are some people that do weekly arena games and they enjoy the heck out of them, so it's definitely not all bad. It's just that Primal is much more focused on the PvE content, cause after all it's a PvE server. Right, so now I'd like to talk about the best aspect of Primal WoW, the community. I've played on several private servers. I played on Warsong, Archangel, Pandashan, WoW Freaks, Molten WoW, Retro WoW, and a few others for a very brief amount of time. And I've never seen a better community here on Primal than on any of those private servers. From the first day that I started leveling here, I've met almost nothing but friendly people who helped me out during questing, who love to have a chat while doing dungeons and were willing to answer my questions I had about this server. This trend continued when I joined my endgame raiding guild Vanilla Knights and started doing endgame content. I was welcomed with open arms, everyone was friendly, and many of the people there helped me through some dungeons so I could get my gear and attunements out of the way. It probably doesn't surprise you to know that after 8 months of being in that guild, I'm still a proud member and I ain't planning on leaving anytime soon. It's not just Vanilla Knights, by the way, there are also some great people in other guilds too. And this is really what I'm trying to get at. At the end of the day, the loot you get might be nice, but it's just pixels. For me, an MMO is all about doing things with other people, sharing moments that will stay with you for a long time. That fancy new staff I'm wielding is nice and all, but the memories I share with the people on the server mean much more to me. People that I now see as more than just guild members. I see them as friends. Yeah, I know I'm getting all soppy here, but for me the social aspect of an MMO has always been very important to me. And when this aspect is missing because of a toxic community, or the complete lack of one on a private server, then I have no interest in leveling there. So, in a nutshell, the community here is better than on any other private server I've played on. Period. Well, I guess that covers pretty much everything I wanted to talk about. I think the only thing left to do now is to come to a verdict. Primal WoW is a solid PvE server with a wonderful community and definitely offers something different. In my opinion, it's one of the best servers I've played on, and not just because of their community. There are some flaws here and there, but to me they're only minor, and they don't take away from the tons of fun I had here. If you're someone who likes the idea of raiding vanilla content with a bit more modern mechanics, and you like the idea of progressing through these 3 versions of the game, then this is definitely something for you. If you just want a solid server with a good community and don't really care about its unique angle, then I would also recommend this server. However, if you're someone that is aimed much more on doing PvP, then I suggest you look elsewhere. Also, if you're looking for that epic feel of every single zone crawling with players that Nostaria's had, then this is also not something for you. Well guys, that's it for my review of Primal Wow. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you like the server, then go ahead and give it a try. I mean, I decided to give this a try cause what the heck, and here I am, 9 months later in a raiding guild and having a blast. As always, I want to thank you for watching this video. I'm Hamsterwheel and have a good one.